news here. My favourite royal, Prince Louis, is making headlines again.
From the moment Prince Louis emerged onto the palace terrace, fully aware of the hundreds of eyes fixed on him, it seemed like just another sunny day of royal appearances. But what happened next would shock everyone present. Expecting polite applause, smiles, and gentle waves, the youngest royal instead delivered a line that stopped the crowd dead in its tracks. Mid-cheer whispers rippled through the audience, palace guards stiffened, and aides exchanged rapid, questioning glances as the innocence of a child collided head-on with centuries of strict protocol.
Prince Louis is stealing the show at Trooping the Color once again. And in case you missed the young prince adorably stealing hearts, here's a look.
Cameras captured the moment, preserving forever the instant a routine palace event turned into something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. What exactly did a 5-year-old say that made trained professionals immediately spring into action? Insiders were quietly rattled. Observers in the royal inner circle began murmuring as that single sentence echoed in their minds. It sent shockwaves through centuries of tradition, secrecy, and the delicate tone of the monarchy itself. A whisper, soft yet potent, carried across the palace terrace. Prince Louis, it seemed, had no intention of stealing the spotlight, but in that instant, the spotlight found him. The scene was meant to be familiar, rehearsed, and safe under the spring sun. Flags fluttered, cameras clicked in rhythm, and the Wales family stepped onto the terrace with the precision expected of a royal appearance carefully orchestrated for public consumption. The goal was straightforward: reassure the public, display unity, and offer a glimpse of the monarchy's next generation. Prince William stood tall, composed, and unwavering. Catherine glided with her usual elegance and controlled poise. Prince George held his place with quiet discipline, and Princess Charlotte smiled with natural ease, already confident in her public presence. And then there was Louis, energetic, curious, completely unrestrained by protocol, and visibly thrilled by the cheering faces and sea of waving flags before him. Initially, everything moved according to plan. The crowd clapped, the cameras clicked, the palace guards remained statuesque along the terrace's perimeter, but those closest to the family immediately sensed something shifting beneath the surface. Louis's attention wandered beyond the crowd, toward the guards lined along the edge of the red carpet. His gaze, bright and unfiltered, carried the fearless confidence only a child could possess. He tugged gently at his aide, stepping forward a few hesitant but determined steps. Seconds passed, but what followed rippled instantly through the palace. Leaning toward a guard, Louis whispered something too soft for the public to hear. The guard bent down, listening intently. Then, Louis spoke again, this time clearly enough for aides nearby to catch fragments. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable. The guard's jaw tightened, his shoulders squared, and his eyes darted sharply toward a senior palace aide. Within moments, another guard raised a hand to his communication device. To the public, nothing had changed. Cheers and smiles continued unabated, but inside the palace, tension crackled like static in the air. Movements that had once flowed seamlessly became sharp and purposeful. The carefully rehearsed spacing of the royal detail subtly but decisively shifted. Calm had been replaced by quiet urgency. Catherine noticed at once. She moved toward her son with controlled speed, her hand firm yet gentle on his shoulder. For a brief instant, the mask of calm slipped from her face, revealing concern, before she covered it again with practiced composure. She whispered to Louis, guiding him back into position. Prince William observed the brief exchange, giving a subtle nod, no words necessary. Later witnesses described the atmosphere as thick with palpable tension. What had begun as a light-hearted public celebration now carried a sharp edge. Within minutes, a decision was made. The public appearance was abruptly cut short. The family left nearly 5 minutes ahead of schedule. The motorcade accelerated, and security presence doubled as they moved swiftly back to the palace. Publicly, nothing was mentioned, yet behind the closed doors of the palace, questions hovered. What could a 5-year-old say to trigger such a precise and coordinated response? Why did a single sentence disrupt a system designed around centuries of control, secrecy, and ritual? And the deeper question remained, Could a child truly uncover hidden truths the palace had worked so hard to keep buried? The sentence refused to remain small. The shift from smiles on the terrace to private concern in the palace was immediate. What unfolded next was never meant to be captured by cameras or witnessed by the public, yet its implications carried far more weight than the brief moment in the sun. Inside the quieter inner chambers, aides expected tension to fade. Surely a child's remark would dissolve into harmless mischief, but that assumption vanished almost instantly. Following protocol, a gentle, soft-spoken aide trained to handle children under pressure knelt beside Louis and calmly asked him to repeat his words. There was no hesitation, no nervous laughter, no playful diversion. Louis looked up steadily, eyes clear and unwavering, and repeated the sentence slowly, each word deliberate. The room fell silent in a way that felt heavy and charged, not calm. Catherine, standing a few steps away, paled as the words sank in. Her reaction wasn't panic, it was recognition. Those closest to her noticed immediately. A sharp inhale, frozen posture, a look that suggested she had just heard something never meant to be spoken aloud, and certainly not by her youngest child. Without drawing attention, she excused herself from the room. Her silence spoke louder than any question. Palace insiders confirmed that Louis's words were not random. They echoed a phrase buried deep within a highly classified royal intelligence briefing, a document seen only by a tiny circle of palace security officials. The similarity was exact enough to raise immediate concern. The response was swift and unusually serious. Within minutes, the chief of palace security activated a confidential protocol. The palace's internal alert level quietly rose to Tier 31. Just one step below full lockdown. This level was reserved for patterns, not simple incidents. Only when multiple signals aligned would it ever be triggered. Behind the scenes, everything shifted. Patrols were rerouted, private communication channels were secured, and senior analysts began combing internal logs, camera feeds, and access records from the past 48 hours. Every movement within the palace walls was reconsidered. Meanwhile, Louis was escorted to a secure playroom, surrounded by familiar faces and routines. To him, nothing had changed. But for the adults, every detail had shifted. What unsettled them most wasn't just what he had said, but how he said it. Calm, deliberate, certain, as though declaring fact rather than observation. At the heart of growing concern was one haunting phrase, quietly repeated across corridors and through security briefings. "They're watching from the walls." Analysts and senior aides exchanged uneasy looks, beginning to question long-held assumptions about privacy, surveillance, and what a child could possibly observe in a place steeped in secrecy. Outwardly composed, inwardly bracing, the palace team struggled to process the implications. How could a 5-year-old speak words that echoed decades-old secrets? What hidden eyes lurked within the palace walls? The echoes of history seemed trapped beneath the stone, silent yet aware. As the night deepened, the palace command wing came to a chilling realization. The sentence Louis had spoken was not random. It had history. Records confirmed it appeared only once before in a sealed 2002 briefing during the late years of Queen Elizabeth II's reign. A report never intended for public eyes. Its coded fragments referenced a security irregularity in the royal living quarters, labelled a lexical anomaly with no known source. How Louis could have repeated it so precisely defied all reason. While analysts traced timelines and access logs, Catherine retreated to her private quarters. Behind a locked door, she moved an armchair, a gift from Queen Elizabeth herself. Hidden beneath it was a thin envelope, one she had hoped never to open again. Its seal was faded with age, bearing a single word written in careful hand: Clarion. A name never spoken aloud, known only to Catherine and the late Queen. She read the contents quickly, unreadable in expression, then destroyed the pages completely. Minutes later, she returned to the command wing, calm but firm. The instruction was simple and unsettling. The East Wing corridor must be monitored again across London. Prince William, attending a military charity event, felt his secure phone vibrate in a precise pattern. 3 short pulses, then silence. He recognized the code immediately. Without explanation, he departed, noticed by onlookers and caught on several phones. By the time he returned to the palace, gates and stairwells had been secured, trace scans were underway, and instinct alone had triggered one of the oldest response systems still embedded in royal protocol. Within the palace walls, an unease began spreading quietly but unmistakably, like a chill no one wanted to acknowledge. Senior members of staff exchanged looks heavy with memory, the kind that only comes from having seen something once before and hoping never to see it again. Some of the older generation recognized the wording instantly, phrases they had heard decades earlier but never spoken aloud in a place like this. Prince Louis's statement, unsettling on its own, did not exist in isolation. What he said mirrored something buried deep in royal history, something deliberately erased from modern record. Nearly the same phrasing had once appeared in Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's final private correspondence to the royal archives, a letter written, reviewed, and then quietly removed from every official index. That connection had remained hidden in a restricted chamber far beneath the palace, where temperature-controlled stone and silence protected the most sensitive materials. There, a narrow bundle wrapped in aging parchment rested beneath the Queen Mother's personal crest. Very few people even knew it existed, and fewer still had permission to request access. Among those documents was a letter long dismissed by modern advisors as symbolic reflection rather than literal concern. The document was titled simply, "A Consideration of Unseen Observers." At the time, it had been brushed aside as metaphor, the musings of a monarch shaped by a different era. Yet when a child's voice echoed the same words within palace walls, that dismissal collapsed instantly. The similarities were too precise, the cadence too aligned, and when the senior archivist retrieved the only untouched physical copy that night, one line, blacked out in every public version, stood fully visible. It did not read like poetry, it read like warning. There are those within our own walls who do not serve the crown, but watch it patiently, waiting. How could Prince Louis repeat words hidden for generations in sealed archives? What did this mean for secrets the monarchy believed safely buried? Stay with us, because the past had just spoken through the present. The moment Louis repeated the chilling words, something inside the palace shifted, almost imperceptibly but undeniably. What had once been dismissed as ceremonial superstition or reflective writing now demanded immediate attention. Ancient fears, long tucked away in dust-covered volumes, seemed to whisper again through stone corridors. The archives team, visibly shaken, prepared a sealed memorandum for the Lord Chamberlain, deliberately bypassing standard bureaucratic procedure. This was no longer academic curiosity. It was operational concern. Decades earlier, during Queen Elizabeth II's transition and the delicate planning for succession, aides had reviewed many of the Queen Mother's final writings. Certain passages raised eyebrows back then, especially references to observers beyond the veil of service, a phrase one aide distinctly remembered questioning. The response at the time had been firm and final. The words were symbolic, nothing more, allegory, reflection, sentiment from a woman nearing the end of her life. The matter was filed away under nostalgia and quietly forgotten. Yet even then, the timing had troubled some staff members. These passages were written just months before the Queen Mother's death, during a period when her clarity was considered unimpeachable. Why, aides had wondered privately, would a matriarch known for discipline and precision speak of unseen watchers inside her own walls? Years later, even Princess Anne, renowned for her sharp realism and lack of patience for fantasy, had asked about the documents. She received the same answer: emotional farewells, metaphor, not warning, nothing literal. Yet now, as Louis's words echoed through the palace, Anne reportedly fell silent. Witnesses described her expression hardening, her gaze freezing as recognition set in. The phrase she had been told to dismiss decades earlier had returned, spoken aloud by a child who could not possibly have known it. For a household that guards history with clinical precision, this convergence of past and present was no coincidence. It reignited conversations the palace had actively avoided for generations. Ancient protocols, archived intelligence, and cryptic references once labelled poetic now demanded review. Inside the command wing, teams began cross-referencing documents that had never been examined together before. Security plans, personal letters, intelligence briefings, all pulled into the same analysis stream. Patterns emerged. Phrases repeated across centuries. Observations once isolated now formed a web too precise to ignore. Outwardly, the palace remained serene. Internally, it shifted into high alert. Staff moved faster, spoke less, and followed instructions without question. The realization was deeply unsettling. A single sentence from a 5-year-old prince had bridged generations, forcing the monarchy to confront shadows it had long pretended were harmless reflections. Stone walls built over centuries suddenly felt alive with meaning. And if a child had noticed something, who else might have seen it? Who, or what, had been watching? Could Prince Louis truly have stumbled onto secrets hidden for centuries within palace walls? And who else might still be paying attention? Stay tuned, because the Blue Room revelations were only beginning. What had long been dismissed as historical ephemera returned now with disturbing weight. Its shadow crept through corridors like a quiet warning, impossible to ignore. The whispers of the past, buried beneath decades of administrative dust, were rising again, demanding recognition. Amid the growing unease, attention subtly turned toward Catherine. Calm, composed, and quietly informed, she had always moved with deliberate restraint inside palace life. Now, she appeared central to understanding what was unfolding. The unspoken questions spread through inner circles. What had Prince Louis truly seen? And who was capable of interpreting it? For years, Catherine had held symbolic access to a hidden chamber within Windsor, known only to a handful of custodians. The Blue Room sat concealed behind a reinforced panel near the late Queen's private study. It did not appear on any official blueprint and was never accessed by routine staff. Its velvet-lined drawers held diaries, letters, and records reserved for future queens, materials meant to guide, not alarm. Recently, Catherine had uncovered a set of Queen Victoria's personal diaries preserved in a stitched leather case marked with her initials. One entry, dated 1852, seized her attention immediately. Victoria described an encounter with her youngest son, who had spoken words he could not have learned. The child referenced unseen watchers and shadows moving through the East Wing at night. Victoria, meticulous and restrained, recorded the incident not with fear, but with clinical concern. She noted the child's silence for days afterward and admitted being unsettled to her core. One line stood out above all others. "He is not unlike one that shall come, one who shall speak again what was never taught." The resemblance to Louis's calm, eerily precise words was undeniable. Catherine felt a chill as she read the passage again, tracing parallels too exact to dismiss. The phrasing, the timing, even the child's composure mirrored what palace security had witnessed only hours earlier. Though she had shared fragments of these findings with Prince William, she deliberately withheld the full depth. The truth sounded unbelievable, and she feared dismissal or ridicule. Yet now, with her own son repeating nearly identical language, history could no longer be ignored. One detail disturbed her most. Victoria had meticulously recorded the child's location during the episode, and it matched the exact East Wing corridors now under renewed surveillance following Louis's words. Past and present collided into a pattern too clear to deny. Catherine, long viewed simply as composed and elegant, was emerging quietly as the key to decoding a mystery stretching back centuries. Every choice she made, from careful study to deliberate silence, suggested she understood the gravity of what her son might have encountered. As the palace walls seemed to hold their breath once more, a single realization settled among those in the know. History was repeating itself. Prince Louis had become the youngest link in a chain dormant for generations. So what secrets had Catherine uncovered, and could Prince Louis unknowingly be revealing a truth the palace has guarded for centuries? Keep watching, because when silence became the loudest signal, control finally slipped. Just as officials believed the tension was contained, something no protocol could stop occurred. An anonymous whistleblower within the guard ranks leaked a classified incident report to a tabloid, and the fallout was instant. The story detonated across media platforms with staggering speed. Headlines screamed that Prince Louis had repeated language drawn directly from a royal security file. Public fascination surged as the palace scrambled. For the first time in over a decade, no official statement arrived to steady the narrative. The leaked file landed just after midnight in the editorial inbox of the Evening Ledger. It came from an untraceable encrypted source, stripped clean of metadata. Editors moved carefully, knowing claims involving the royal family demanded proof, not hype. Investigators verified phrasing, cross-checked terminology, and contacted trusted sources. What pushed skepticism into urgency was confirmation from a former palace employee turned informant. According to him, the language matched an internal operation known only to a narrow circle as Obsidian Key. Once that confirmation landed, the decision was made by morning. The headline dominated global news feeds like wildfire, igniting a storm that reached every corner of the world. At the center were the same words spoken innocently by a 5-year-old. They're watching from the walls. On the surface, a child's curious observation. But beneath the surface, a ripple of panic and disbelief surged through corridors, private chambers, and palace offices. It wasn't just the phrase itself. It was the context, the history, the impossible echo of decades-old security language that made the words impossible to ignore. The article claimed that the phrase was not just unsettling, but structurally identical to coded language used in classified scenario briefings known as the Omega Protocols. Circulated in absolute secrecy between 1997 and 1999. These Omega Protocols were meticulously designed to test the monarchy's response to potential national emergencies, foreign threats, and internal security anomalies. To see a child reproduce them, nearly word for word, was unthinkable. It was an intelligence nightmare wrapped in the innocence of a public appearance, a scenario no palace aide could have anticipated. A partially redacted internal memo allegedly lifted from a confidential debrief suggested that Prince Louis's wording matched pre-established alert terminology used in high-level simulations designed for senior palace officials. For those familiar with royal defense systems, it sounded impossible, like fiction bleeding into reality. Catastrophic, some whispered. The palace response was precise. Cold and deliberate. Silence. No official denial. No reassurance. No attempt to explain the unexplainable. That silence, deliberate and unbroken, only fanned the flames of speculation. Commentators and intelligence analysts scrambled for answers. How could a 5-year-old repeat language buried in classified files? Was it luck, coincidence, or something more? Who could have exposed Prince Louis to these phrases? And why had language dormant for decades resurfaced now through a child in public? Pressure mounted quickly. By mid-morning, 2 senior guards stationed at Windsor during the original terrace incident were quietly summoned. Their interviews were discreet, but news of the inquiries spread rapidly through the palace. Within days, one of the guards resigned without explanation. Paperwork claimed routine procedure, but the timing screamed of internal fractures. Something within the palace, meticulously controlled for centuries, was beginning to crack. The sequence of events was impossible to dismiss. A child's words, centuries-old documents, decades-old security codes, and now a resignation from within the guard itself. Each element alone could be rationalized. Together, they formed a pattern too precise and too unnerving to ignore. The media storm raged outside, while the palace remained silent, calculating, waiting for the right moment to respond. But internally, the crisis was escalating with unprecedented speed. For those who watched closely, one reality became clear. This was no longer about a single remark made during a cheerful public appearance. Something beneath the surface of the monarchy, long maintained and rigidly controlled, had begun to fracture. And once fractured, it revealed layers that few were meant to see. The palace walls, built over centuries, seemed alive with echoes of past secrets, whispers that had long been buried and carefully silenced. Could Prince Louis's words truly expose secrets hidden for generations? Were these truly coincidental echoes, or a glimpse into something far deeper, a hidden thread running through the lineage of the monarchy itself? By the morning following the leak, Windsor and Kensington were alive with silent urgency. Every aide, every officer, every staff member moved with the precision of decades of training, but their movements were tense, sharp, edged with suspicion and concern. The playful energy that had once defined Prince Louis's public appearances was now subdued. Every engagement was cancelled or minimised. The child, unaware of the storm he had unleashed, remained calm, surrounded by familiar faces and routines, but his presence had become carefully controlled. Catherine, meanwhile, was almost entirely absent from public view. Her days were consumed with private consultations, document reviews, and subtle monitoring of intelligence and security reports. She had become the quiet nerve centre of palace operations, orchestrating responses behind closed doors. The royal household was no longer responding solely to external attention. They were bracing against a storm from within. Media speculation escalated beyond expectation. International news networks, tabloids, online forums, and social media exploded. Headlines screamed, "Prince Louis repeats classified code, palace panic." They're watching from the walls. Royal security breach shocks monarchy. Public fascination turned to obsession, and debate raged about the implications. Was the youngest prince simply an innocent child, oblivious to the chaos his words had caused? Or was there something deeper at play, a prophetic streak or hidden knowledge threading through the royal lineage? Admirers hailed Louis as a quiet beacon of truth, a child whose honesty cut through decades of veiled control. Critics warned that his words had exposed a system designed to protect centuries of secrets, and that the recurrence of such a phrase could indicate deeper, unacknowledged dangers lurking within the palace walls. The internal ripple effects were immediate. Camilla, deeply angered by the headlines and suspicious of their origins, reportedly confronted a senior courtier during breakfast. Those present described the exchange as heated, sharp with accusations and frustration. She suggested that the Wales camp might have orchestrated the narrative, a calculated media strategy to sway public opinion and divert attention from internal power shifts. Her sense of isolation, coupled with growing awareness of Catherine's increasing influence, intensified her frustration. For the first time in memory, the palace seemed divided not just by hierarchy, but by alliances, suspicion, and the weight of long-standing resentments. Meanwhile, Parliament began to stir. Opposition coalitions demanded inquiries into potential national security risks connected to the heirs. Lawmakers pressed questions. How could sensitive intelligence appear in the public domain, even inadvertently? The headlines had already spread globally. The narrative had grown too powerful, too viral, for any simple statement or denial to contain it. Calls for transparency were urgent. Some questioned whether palace secrecy had contributed to the confusion, or worse, masked systemic vulnerabilities that had gone unnoticed for generations. Public discussion took on a life of its own. Online forums debated the possibility of a child unknowingly repeating decades-old security codes. Television panels dissected the incident from every angle, framing it as a moment of both innocence and extraordinary consequence. Admirers viewed Louis as a symbol of clarity, a voice untainted by protocol and routine, cutting through layers of deception and control. Critics, however, warned that the revelations had exposed the monarchy's fragile system of secrets, suggesting that repeated phrases and internal codes could hint at vulnerabilities within the palace structure itself. The convergence of crises, media frenzy, political scrutiny, family tension, historical echoes, underscored one undeniable truth: the story had outgrown the palace walls. Prince Louis's simple words, "They're watching from the walls," had transcended childhood curiosity. They had become a catalyst for a reckoning, bridging past and present, innocence and authority, observation and revelation. The monarchy faced a question it had long avoided. What hidden truths lay dormant within its corridors, waiting for the right voice to awaken them? Every glance, every movement, every whispered conversation suggested that the palace's delicate equilibrium was fragile. Amid growing uncertainty, Catherine's role, once primarily ceremonial, had quietly transformed into something central, indispensable, and deeply informed. She alone seemed capable of interpreting layers of history, understanding coded language from past generations, and recognizing the full weight of her son's words. As debates raged outside and tension mounted inside, one realization became crystal clear. The monarchy, always tightly scripted and controlled, had entered a chapter it could no longer fully manage or predict. So, what do you think Louis truly saw behind those palace walls? Could a 5-year-old really echo secrets buried for generations? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, and if you want more royal revelations like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for all the latest updates.